Hey everybody, I want to tell you about the new Tidewe heated vest. They come in camouflage, they come in black, and they come in jackets too with sleeves and hoods. But I like the black vest. I always liked vests. This is nice and thin. It has a battery pack that goes in an inside pocket here and plugs in, and you can recharge the battery pack. Then it has a button right here that you can press and hold, and it has a little colored light behind it, and white is low. Red is high and blue is medium, and actually even on low it's pretty warm. I'm actually kind of sweating out here. It's nice and thin, so I can get a coat over the top of it, or hunting gear over the top of it, but I can still look okay and not have to wear camouflage when I go out to the store or out working in the yard. I kind of like it. As always, I want to thank Tidewe for paying for the show. You ever see those stupid memes, "Where's Waldo?" And those pictures where they hide Waldo in a crowd, and it's captioned, "Where's Waldo?" Well, lately, I've been getting messages, "Where's Mario?" And we're getting so many of those messages, I'm ready to put up a meme that has him hidden in a crowd. But instead, we'll bring you Mario and his season of hunting. In this episode, we're going to learn all kinds of stuff from Mario and all kinds of tips. And one of the main ones we can focus on here is hunting near access trails and hunting near human access and the tolerance that deer give you for hunting near these access trails. So come with me and let's join the long lost Mario and see where he's been.
This has been a very busy year. Dan and I are full steam ahead working on stand prototype production as well as getting sticks out. So and obviously, as everyone's been dealing with all the stuff going on in our world. So it's been a busy year. I haven't been on the beast that much, but I do have a hunt that I'd like to share with you guys, a couple hunts. So Dan and I are going to go through and just talk about kind of what transpired over a couple days in late October, which is one of my more enjoyable times of the year to hunt. I like hunting in that pre-rut, close to pre-rut time, where you start getting morning movement, you start getting more activity in daylight at night, and those bucks really start getting active, where you could still pattern them on their bedding location, but then they're starting to get more active on those corridors and trails. I had scouted a couple different properties in western Wisconsin. I had access to a couple different private spots, and then I had access close to there to some public to hunt. And I had a longtime friend that was hunting with me in those spots. Opening weekend, he actually took a decent 8-pointer off the private farm. And the reason why I bring this up is because that specific farm, like many farms, it rotates soybeans and corn in the primary field. And the times that I have hunted there over the last 3 years, I mean maybe a half dozen times, I've had encounters with a mature buck right in the corner of where this bedding transition is. Now it's your typical 60-degree angle, a tight corner that drops off in elevation, because in western Wisconsin it's a hill country farm. So really the field is up on this plateau, and it's surrounded, the perimeter of this field is all a steep drop off that goes into a ravine, and there's also an oak flat in there that has a lot of willow and of course buckthorn that's growing up. So it creates that scenario where you have that thick at the top in those flats that's right adjacent to that cornfield. Now, why I like that spot this year to get out there and hunt is because of that corn corridor created a protective corridor where I had encounters a couple of years ago with a buck bedding off that bedding point. So again, it was a point right at the end of the field that dropped off at an extreme angle. There's a rock outcropping actually right off of there, so the deer can't exit straight down. So what they end up doing is they either exit to their east or they exit to their northwest. And this location puts them coming out right into that corn corridor, and they use that as a safe travel. The 23rd of October it was a windy, sort of semi-rainy day, which is good for a couple reasons. I mean, going there with the higher winds, it allows me to get in and access that spot through the corn with the cover of the rain noise and the wind noise. I mean, typically when you're walking through a cornfield, it can be fairly noisy. Now for this scenario, I could walk parallel with the corn stalks for about 350, 400 yards, but then to get right in line with where I wanted to set up in relationship to the two bedding areas. There's a bedding area to my north and there's a bedding area to my south. I had to make a perpendicular cut right across that corn. In previous years when I had hunted this, and this is kind of learned, you know, if I walked that transition, so that corridor, all the way from where I come in to the spot, I get too close to bedding. And I also get my scent in those potential traffic areas where the deer are coming out of bedding down the corridor from the north, or they're coming up from the south in the corridor. And it's one of those things where I think, you know that, right? But it's easier to walk through the corn corridor edge, but then you get burnt. And I happened to get burnt on that a couple years ago, where I was scouting along that corn corridor, started seeing rubs, started seeing scrapes, started looking at what tree I was going to pick out and where I was going to go, and I pushed it a little too far, and a buck stood up right on the edge of that drop-off point, where it comes to a point of that corn corridor, and he busted out, and I, ended up not seeing anything that night. I spooked him out of there, but I never had a chance at that buck again. So I knew the area was really sensitive, so I didn't want to access it like that anymore. And there was two different ways I'd access it. I had accessed it from the top through that corridor, and I had also tried accessing from the bottom. There's a creek bottom at the bottom of the farm that runs along the road. So I had tried coming straight up from there before, but that again puts me pretty close to bedding. So on the 23rd, I get set up early like I normally do. Dan jokes about that, but and it's like 25-mile-an-hour gusting winds, and it's doing one of those half rain, cold storm fronts are moving in.
All right, it's Friday, October 23rd. There's a strong northwest wind again. I'm back up hunting that corn corridor that I had an encounter with the two larger bucks on opening weekend. There's a lot of sign in here. I slid over a couple trees to try to get up higher. But the challenge in here is that it slopes down from the corn pretty significantly into a ridge behind me. And 5 sticks up, I think I got just enough height to make it good for anything that comes down that corridor again. I took a different entrance in, coming straight through the corn to this spot instead of paralleling the edge of the tree line in the corridor. Hopefully that helps me with scent. I'll still be busted if they get perpendicular with me or if I get anything coming from my south. But otherwise I'm sitting pretty good. I've got some really good shots right out in front of me and right to my right. So let's try to get it done. There's the corridor there that comes down from a rise in the property. Up on that rise, there's a really thick oak savanna where they've been bedding up there. And then down on this opposite side, down the corn corridor that way, leads into a corner, and that corner has got some really thick bedding as well. wind is not ideal. It's cutting across the corridor like this. But it's better than it having blown back into either bedding spot. There's also a pretty significant trail in the tree line there.
About 25 yards from me south, leading into that bedding point, there was a large primary scrape. Now the way that I came in again, because I came in perpendicular, when I walked into the spot where I wanted to set up, and I could look down that corn corridor and I could see that that scrape was there. There was a licking branch hanging over the corridor. I could see that that was broken and there was a large scrape. And there was a lot of other sign. You know how you see transition grass between the corn and a wood edge that's really matted down in a lot of trails. So there was a lot of that sign there.
So now, when you set up, did you come out of the corn in a spot where you could shoot from the tree to the corn, so that you could hit where you walked, so that any place you got your scent,
Yes.
because a deer could come up either way?
Right. So my intent was to not travel anywhere north or south. I wanted to go straight to that tree. And then when I set up, I could, if a deer would walk from the south and it would get right to my scent trail, I could shoot right to that point, or before it got to that point. If something was coming from the north, I could shoot it before it crossed that scent trail, for that exact reason. Because typically with mature deer, once they cross your scent trail, the game is up. The other kind of goofy thing about this is the wind predominantly comes out of the west, and it's either a northwest or a southwest wind. This night, it was a 25-mile-an-hour southwest wind. So the wind is actually just off, blowing across the corridor, up over a little rise. So I'm setting up on trees that are sort of bent towards the field. I'm sure you've seen this before, where everything grows towards the sunlight. And so these trees are kind of at an angle, and they're also down in elevation from the way that the corn rises. So it makes for a little bit of a tricky setup, because you have to get 5+ sticks up so you're high enough so your scent is carrying over the corridor, and you don't want to be line of sight, so when a deer is coming and walking in, they can pick you off sort of line of sight if you're level with that corridor. But I knew that going in because I had hunted that area before. He made his way to the north where the rise, it starts to rise a little bit to that next bedding area. And he entered into the corn and fed there for probably 5-10 minutes. He then turned around and walked right back in the corridor, passed in front of me, and actually took a trail that goes perpendicular to the corridor and drops right below me. Now, he was a smart buck because he knew something wasn't quite right. He didn't pick up my wind. He looked up at me, so he probably knew something was going on. He ended up dropping down on that trail that goes underneath me and actually J-hooked behind me and looked at me again. And I actually slowly turned around and caught him staring right at the back of my tree. He ended up walking away on a trail that led into the thicket and dropping down into that creek bottom. Shortly after that is when I had the spike horn come through. Overall, it was turning out to be a good hunt. I was seeing deer early, it was in daylight. So we get right close to close, right? It's last gray light. The wind has not died down at all. And I'm a little wet, I'm a little cold, and I keep looking over at that scrape and I'm like, I think I'm gonna call it. I don't know, I don't think anything else is coming out. It's just in that last 5 minutes of shooting light. So I take my bow. Actually, I think the first thing I did was I shut off my camera, packed up my camera, threw it in my bag, hooked it, and then I dropped my bow down and dropped my string. Not 45 seconds later, I hear the same crack in the corn that I did when the deer came out previously. So I look over and there's a big bodied deer at that scrape, 25 yards from me to my south. And of course you get that sick feeling like there's nothing I can do. My camera's packed up, my bow is on the ground. I dropped my string because I was planning on, packing up like almost immediately and getting down. So the buck moves his head and he swings like this, and I see a large main beam on what ended up being his left side. Yeah, his left side. A heavy main beam. I can make out the white main beam, and he's working the scrape and working the licking branch. He spends about 30 seconds there at the scrape. From there, he slowly walks out in the corridor, gets just about even with me. Now he's at 15 yards broadside. And I notice his left side isn't a complete main beam, it's a little bit deformed, and I can't make out the rest of the main beam. So like I said, it's right at gray light. And I look and that rack almost looks black on the one side, but so it looks about this long and like it's got a crab claw or something at the top of it. So I was like, all right, he's a mature deer, but something's going on with the right side of that rack. It kind of made me feel a little bit better that I think I probably still would have taken a shot at him or taken him because it was a bigger mature deer. So this buck proceeds to not have any care in the world. He didn't smell me. He didn't see me. He turns on that same trail that goes perpendicular to where I'm sitting. He walks. I mean, my bow is laying on the ground. He maybe walked 10 yards away from where my bow is laying and goes right behind me and drops down into that low. And I slowly kind of turn around, and when he drops down into the low, there was an open area there where I could shoot to. He hits this little, there was a 4-inch tree there, and he just starts going to town on it. So I actually stood up and turned around, and I turned my cell phone camera on, and I filmed him. So why that was interesting to me is because these two bedding areas, they're up high. And one is sort of landlocked by this rock outcropping drop off. So the deer have to come the way that these deer did to filter down to the creek bottom this way, or they have to go east, which goes over into another ravine bed and another CRP field, right? But they can't drop straight down on that elevation because there's these rock outcroppings. And then from the top, they can go north, or they can drop straight down, but the farmhouse is fairly close to where that other bedding section is. So this area seemed to be like the hub. That's what attracted me to it. So how that leads into the next day's hunt. You get a good encounter like that on a decent buck, and of course you're excited, but you're also a little bit disappointed, right? Where I was at in western Wisconsin is a couple hours away drive, so I pack up all my stuff, text my buddy that lives down there, and I said, hey, I had, tell the story, I had this encounter with this really nice buck, it was exciting, but I didn't have time, I couldn't stay down there to hunt the next day to hunt that buck. I had to come back home the next day because I had things to do with the family later on that afternoon, on Saturday. So I drove home, I got home at about 11:30 at night, and I'm like, I need to sit the morning. And there's a spot that was really interesting to me because I actually it was probably about a week before, there's an area that I hunt where the access trail is just off a human walking trail, And the access trail into the timber, we always walk the same spot. You know, Dan and I have talked about this before, about keeping our scent on a certain trail, because the deer tolerate it there. Well, the week prior when I had accessed this, there was a large scrape that had opened up right at the opening of the timber in this access trail. And what was interesting about that is that there was a large pile of scat and one large turd that was in this scrape. So it got me thinking that there's a larger mature animal in the area that's activating this scrape. I've got two fresh scrapes, one here and one over there that just opened up. This is on the walking trail coming in. There's a deer bedded right on the other side of this brush pile where this downed tree is. This is a good sign. It means these bucks are traveling along this corridor here. Traveling up out of this corridor, coming in to here and here, right through that corridor there. But I'd not seen any traffic in there in the evening. Meaning, you know, I walked through there in the evening, I hadn't seen any bucks late when I'm coming out of there. The few times in the past when I've hunted that area in the evening, I've never seen anything come through there. And the way that this area kind of sets up, it's a section of timber that's between a tamarack swamp, kind of an open savanna, and then to the northwest, there's another cattail marsh that we know is a really good bedding area. So I had a hunch that possibly in the morning, whatever buck was activating that scrape might be traveling through there in the morning on the way back to bedding to that northwest cattail marsh location. And this is, you know, it's about a quarter mile run, right, from where that location is, transitions through a piece of timber, down into some lowland area, and then you get to that cattail marsh. So I told myself, you know, get up in the morning, get there early. Now, the thing that I didn't, at the time I was going back and forth with, is the wind is tricky there too, because there was going to be a north wind, which has the wind actually at the edge of this timber blowing out into that open CRP, that grass area. And if I hunt further back north and try to shoot right at that access trail, there's a chance that my wind and scent in the opening will go and pool towards that access trail, because everywhere else is really thick. There's a lot of buckthorn growing up, but there's that one open area, and I've had that happen in the past where if you get a wind, you know, blowing from your backside, it'll shift and it'll pool in those areas like that. So I was going back and forth. Do I hunt on the ground? Do I hunt, you know, set up my stand and hunt high? And I ultimately decided to hunt on the ground, and the reason why I did that is because there's so much buckthorn in that area that getting up high in a certain level actually creates, for this specific area, created less shooting opportunities for me because of the thicket of that buckthorn. So I decided that I could sneak in, and there was one little low-lying area that kind of created a bowl in the ground, and it was shrouded by buckthorn. But I could get in there and I could sit, and that main trail that had the scrape on it was directly perpendicular with me. So it's directly to my east. The wind is coming out of the north across me like this. So anything that came to me from the east or from the south, as long as it wasn't directly south, they're coming from the southeast, which is what I anticipated, they could walk to me and get to that scrape without winding me. So I get set up. It's just getting about daylight. 6:45 or so, and I actually had another hunter come through, walk into their stand or their location. And that was right at about, as I'm remembering now, it was probably 7 o'clock, maybe 6:45, 7 o'clock. So they walk through on what is the human walking trail, and they go off. At about 7:10, I catch more movement. Not 5 minutes later, I pick up more movement. And now this time, the first thing I see is antlers, tines. And it's out in that open area again on the walking trail. Now both these deer are coming from the direction that that hunter just walked, right? Not 10 minutes later. So this is interesting, because how these deer move and how they pattern people. Not saying that's what they were doing, but it's interesting to me.
Well, obviously, I mean, they're walking up a trail that people just walked up and they're not having a reaction.
Right.
So obviously they're used to people using that access trail when they go in there and hunt, and they're just waiting until people go by to go through.
Right, right. That's what I presume. So now I'm getting excited. I get a look at this thing. At first glance, I see the height of his tines. We all go through this. This deer is getting my heart rate up. After seeing the buck the night before and the mature animal, I'm looking at this thing, I'm like, if I get an opportunity, I'm going to shoot this buck. This buck comes, and he's coming down the human walking trail, and he actually gets parallel with me. But he's not in the timber yet. He's still in that grass area on that trail. And he's lowering his head, and he's feeding a little bit, and he's smelling. And I'm able to turn, I turn the camera, and I get the camera on him. And you got to remember, as I'm sitting, I'm kind of sitting like this, and I'm lower than the actual surface of the ground because I'm kind of in this little bowl, and there's buckthorn all around me. So through the buckthorn, I'm seeing him, I'm seeing his horns and his out, and so he looks right in my direction. I'm thinking, there is a north wind and it's like 0 miles per hour. Which again, even though he's directly downwind from me, he doesn't get spooked, he didn't smell me. Having that next to no wind and that calmness actually helped me out, right? So that buck, he ends up doing the exact same thing. He turns his head, so his body is facing west. He actually rotates his head back east, and he looks right at that opening where that scrape was, where that fork horn was. At the same time that that buck looks, the fork horn comes back out of the buckthorn that's in the timber and starts making his way towards the scrape. The mature buck turns and makes a beeline right towards the scrape. And they both sort of get close to the scrape at the same time, and the small buck actually turns and starts coming directly towards me. This isn't, I'm going to be busted here. That small one's going to get too close, he's going to spook, and the big one's never going to come in.
I just shot him off the ground, baby. I think I got a good hit on him. That's that buck that was making that scrape. Right at the entrance. I can't believe that worked. I knew they'd be traveling that walking path again. He's a decent one. Alright, I got hair right there. And then if you look at the angle of the shot, going up through here, there's hair sprayed all the way back here. And I've even got blood spraying back onto this leaf here. Problem is, I don't see my arrow back here. But now I'm thinking I might have hit him a little forward. And it's buried in that front shoulder. Alright, we got blood, that's a good sign. Blood. Pretty dark already though. There he is. That's a decent one. Wow, look in here. Look what he's got going in here. He's got all this scraped up in here. He walked that human walking trail on the outside and then turned and skirted and came right in on the trail that we normally access. Put his nose down in the scrape, took a couple steps right out, and boom.
Of course, I'm excited and half amazed that it actually worked. But so it was cool. I've hunted off the ground before and had encounters with deer off the ground before, but this is the biggest buck that I've ever had the opportunity to take off the ground in that scenario like that. Another guy that was hunting in the area, I want to thank him, Kevin Zalewski. He actually ended up shooting a really nice 11-pointer, I think, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later. But I knew Kevin was close, like he was hunting in that area, so I actually texted him and said, hey, you want to come out and give me a hand? And he came out and gave me a hand and helped me drag it out. So I want to thank Kevin for doing that.
What's up, possum? How you doing there? What's going on?